Oopsie daisy.
Whoops.
All right. If you're watching this video, I guess whatever. I don't know how to do intros, but we're here to talk about the not debatably best book of all time, Spirit Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez.
Unparalleled.
Yeah, and I got my buddy here, Nick. Nick, introduce yourself and your channel and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Evie. My name is Nick from the channel Wicked Good Books. It's a channel dedicated to books, all things book adjacent, which includes video games, movies, film, TV, anime, all that good stuff. But yeah, Simon Jimenez is one of my favorite authors, newer authors. And when I saw that Evie was reading Vanished Birds, I was like, yes, because it was really one of my favorite books when it first came out. And then when I saw that he had a new book coming out, I can't remember which one of us was like, we have to do something about this book together.
You messaged me and you were like, get the e-arc
Yeah.
and we can buddy read it. And I requested the e-arc and
then read it in 24 hours.
Comparatively, I read it, was consumed by it, loved it. You still hadn't finished it and you wound up not finishing it until after the book came out.
It's true.
And I read it a second time, reread it with
you lapped me. You lapped me. It's the e-arc, I don't know how it was on your Kindle. I have an old, like the first, like my Kindle is literally called the Kindle Fire HD. It was like back when like HD was important.
Hip and cool. Yeah.
Yeah, like high definition, guys. This is like this is the future. And I don't know, it's great. I can see things in color, like the covers and stuff, but sometimes the e-arcs, they come all squished when you try to change the size of the fonts. So all the cool things that Jimenez was doing with, form and stuff was just not unavailable. So like reading it and not knowing why it would pop out sometimes and do like a different voice, I was like, what is happening? So it's slowed me down like crazy, but I was happy to get the audiobook and the physical when it came out and had to double time to catch up to you on your reread.
Nice. I mean, it's one of the books that, also with the Vanished Birds, that I immediately wanted to reread after I finished it. And again, after I reread it. And I'm sure after I reread it again, I will want to immediately reread it. But
for sure.
Nick is the one that actually Nick is the one that actually got me into the Vanished Bird, in the Vanished Birds. He put it on my, was it 12 books to read in 12 months or whatever?
Yeah, it was.
That I've subsequently failed entirely on. I think I've read like 3 of the books. Whatever, it's fine. But at least I got the Vanished Birds out of it because it is beautiful and stunning and wonderful, and it introduced me to this author, and it got me to this book, and it's so good. Anyways, about this book,
absolutely,
let us discuss it. We're gonna start with We're gonna start with spoilers, guys. No, we're gonna start spoiler free a little bit, as much as we can, and then we'll just go into gushing about it.
Heck yeah.
So, what was your favorite? I don't know how. Actually, which question do I want to start with first? Okay, how would you pitch this book to someone that had never heard of it, never heard of the author?
So, if you had asked me this question yesterday, I would be completely stumped. However, my wife earlier was like, "Oh, what book are you guys talking about?" That's why I was doing this, and I was like, "Oh, Spirit Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez," and she's like, "Oh, that's the author of The Vanished Birds." I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "That's one of your most anticipated releases. What's it about? What's it like?" I was like, and I had that like I don't know. It's so hard to describe this book, and I was just like, it's like never-ending story in a little bit of like Studio Ghibli film mixed together with just like multiple timelines in the storytelling with like not really Game of Thrones, but it has that level of violence. Like it's a lot. But I was like never-ending story in Spirited Away smashed together. And I don't know if that's a good way to pitch it because I feel like it's really not those things, but it really exists on its own tier. Whereas like Vanished Birds, I can be like, if you like Hyperion, you might like this because they're very similar. It's a little shorter, but Spirit Cuts Through Water, I actually found the spine to be not necessarily misleading, but I had a completely different idea what this book was going to be about going into it. How about you?
Yeah, so the like summary premise thing, it's not that it's misleading or wrong. It is actually accurate to what the story like is,
Yeah,
but it's so much more than that. Like
way more.
that is just I feel like yeah, that's the maybe the overarching like point of it,
Yeah.
but there's just so much nuance to this story that is just incredible. I would say for anyone that doesn't like second person, please stay away from this book because I don't want poor ratings, okay?
Yes, yeah. Go into that. That is pretty much not necessarily on the label, but you get in the first chapter. So if that's not for you, like don't push yourself and then be mad that it's there because it's definitely very present. Jimenez is definitely playing with form a lot in this book. He does it in Vanished Birds, but it's a lot. I don't want to call it subtle, but you can clearly see like, okay, this chapter was written this way. Start the next chapter. Oh, I guess this is going to be all like journal entries and stuff. So, like it's still playing with form, but it's a little less abstract, I think.
Yeah,
Whereas this book, you turn a page and you're like, you have to reorientate yourself, and that was kind of part of the experience for me, why I enjoyed it so much. But if that's like not your read, like if you don't like linear, cut and dry, point A to B to C, like I won't say it might not be for you because I always tell people like if that's not for you, maybe try and challenge yourself. Maybe you'll surprise yourself. But yeah, if you don't like second person, it's gonna be a
yeah.
tough one.
Well, I mean, he kind of also sets you up with the dedication when he says, "This one's for me." And I'm like, "I like that.
Flex.
That's
What
great."
what a flex.
But it's like you that can seem so like not narcissistic, but yeah, I guess narcissistic, like hoity-toity,
Yeah.
self-indulgent or whatever. But after reading The Vanished Birds and seeing the complexity there, even though it is fairly more traditional, straightforward,
Yeah.
like I reading the dedication, I was like, okay, that's shifting my expectations. Like this is a very personal story.
100%. I'm glad you said that's exactly what I was gonna say.
But even then, and even though it feels so personal, it still feels like so universal at the same time. Like I am not a gay Filipino man. Like I am a white woman. Like, but I felt so connected to these characters and what Simon Jimenez was exploring through himself, like as you as the a character narrator,
Mhm.
and just it's just so good.
So wonderful.
So good. Um, yeah. So
Yeah, that dedication got me too because I guess I suppose I would have had a similar thought going into it if I had not read Vanished Birds, but because I knew how sincere Vanished Birds was, even though it was still pretty like heavy and that the themes are there, and it's a very heavy book if you're not like in the mood for that kind of read.
mhm,
But when I read the dedication for Spear Cuts Through Water, it was like right away I'm like, oh, this is gonna be very personal. Like this is gonna hurt me, but not like in a traditional way where it just makes me sad. Like this is gonna be like a really beautiful story that I know means a lot to the author. Now let's see if I can connect to it. And then pretty much right away, the book opens essentially with not giving too much spoils away with storytelling. Essentially the art of storytelling, being told a story by your elder, by your grandmother, by your mother, however you want to look at it. I think Lola is his grandmother, and she's telling him this story, and it puts you into that position. And I'm sure maybe not, but most people can relate to being told a story. I mean, I'm not sure. It's actually a question I had that I wanted to ask you, like before diving too deep into it, was like, what is your personal history with storytelling, with your family? Do you have like a history of your family passing down stories to you, or like sitting it down when you're a kid telling you stories, or did you find that later in life?
um, so not not a lot. My dad was into genealogy and or he still is, I should say. But growing up, like we would go on genealogy trips, like family trips to go to cemeteries to find old ancestral like great grandparents, graves and stuff like that. And he would go to, distant cousins, like family reunions to just gather stories and stuff like that. And, they're urban legends of our family and however true or false they are, kind of not really grew up with them, but I heard of them through my dad.
Mhm.
Because I didn't like I guess that's one of the things that I liked about this story, but I also felt like a bittersweetness of it, of the narrator is so connected to his family, and he has his grandparents and his siblings and his father. I was a person that grew up with just my parents and my brother. I didn't have like an extended family, like growing up in the same area. Like, obviously we would go and visit them, but a lot of people live in the same town with their family in the same town and stuff like that. And I was a military brat, so we didn't really have that. So I was like, oh, this is the type of stuff that I would have loved to experience growing up. And again, it was a little bittersweet seeing it through the narrator's eyes of this kind of not resentment, but this kind of struggle and push and pull of how do I, maintain my identity or establish an identity through family history. And, it's not a spoiler, I don't think, but, the narrator is biracial. It is definitely implied that he's biracial. And, finding your identity through that of like, am I this or am I that, or how do I connect with both sides of myself, So.
And is the world going to change me at all? Because it starts off, I don't believe it's clear which war is happening. I think Jimenez was kind of vague about it to specifically make it so it could fit in anywhere. I kind of got World War II vibes from it for a second, just because the technology seemed a little older. But I feel like he also was vague enough with it. Maybe I missed it, but I feel like it could exist in that time period, or it could be kind of more universal. But that's also a huge element too, is like, it's a coming of age story, but not a traditional one. At least not.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, so that's actually one of the things that that I kind of I'm curious about because a lot of people, well, not a lot of people. So you've said, it feels like World War II. Angela from Literature Science Alliance, she said it felt like World War I, World War II. But for me, it honestly felt more modern, like maybe 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I could see it too with the phone.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, wars are not just the Great Wars. Wars happen all over the place, and however small they are, they still have a large impact on the community and stuff like that. But even then, and actually, I just thought about it when you said it, is like, is it even a real like our world type war? I know that they reference the new world and stuff like that in the old world, but it's so like there's an ambiguity there. That's probably not the right word, but there's just this it's not so set in stone that it's like it could be just an absolutely fantastical world anyways. Even in the quote unquote real world of the where he's telling his family story.
Absolutely. It lets you kind of plug it in to wherever you are. I think that's another access point to it as well, that it doesn't limit you right away by being like, this is exactly when this is happening. And that kind of makes you feel like, oh, this is more historical. And I don't know about you or anyone else, but I know when I'm reading a historical text, I tend to take a slight step back, and not like a comfortable step back, but like, oh, this has already happened. I already know how this war goes. So like, there's that layer there. Whereas this felt like this could be now or then. It still feels very immediate. I'm in his shoes, hearing this story from his Lola. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we can just go ahead and hop into spoilers, because I just want to gush about this book. Like, come on.
It is a beautiful book. I mean, I think it goes without saying his prose are phenomenal. The way he's able to, like, I think I said this to you when we were reading it together. I was like, I can't imagine, being a writer myself, I'm kind of chaotic with my notes, but there's like a structure to it. And I think every writer probably feels that way too, but like they're controlled chaos. I cannot imagine what this book looks like laid out, because of how many moving parts it has and how everything is kind of interwoven, but feels so not necessarily outlandish. It just, because it all feels like it fits perfectly by the end of it all, but it's like 3 different stories layered into one. And I don't know, that was one thing throughout me reading it that I kept thinking, like, how do they keep track of this world? Because it's more than one world happening at the same time.
And it's not like, oh, this chapter is for this world. There's a weaving
right.
to everything.
It weaves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so by the way, this acknowledgement and credit where credit is due. Nick, you were the one that was like, hey, let's use the book club kit. So I'll definitely leave a link down below to the publisher's book club kit thing, where you can get these, questions and stuff like that and ponder over them yourself. But in his in Simon Jimenez's Dear Reader section, he talks about the very briefly about the writing process and how it took him 4 years to write this. And it was probably, he said, worked on it, and the backdrop to some of the hardest years of his life, both professionally and personally. Some days it felt like trying to swallow a panicked whale whole. Some days I thought I wouldn't finish it.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, I write as if every work will be my last, and this book is the ultimate example of that ethos. And you feel that,
oh yeah,
there's a determined desperation in the prose, and you feel that same way in at least for me in the Vanished Birds.
Yeah, definitely.
There's very much an intentionality of if this is the last thing that I write, this is the thing that I want to be known for
sure.
And it's and again, it all feels so personal. So it's I want it to be a reflection of me while also standing the test of time or whatever.
Absolutely.
I definitely think it will.
I think so too. I think if anything, it'll get stronger over time. There's a finality to both books where they both kind of end, and there's no sequel. There's no nothing. He's not setting everything up. There are some questions and some stones unturned, but for the most part, these books they're self-contained and they are written as if this is I feel that this is the last book I ever write. This is what I want to be known for. And this one I can definitely feel more than anything because it feels so personal.
Yeah.
And I actually read it in an interview. I think it was for Locust, but I could be wrong. I'll put a link in. I'll send it to you if I can find it, where he said that he doesn't know if writing books, if he's cut out to continue to write books his whole life. And I was like, please don't say that because you're amazing and I want to read you forever. But I also respect and understand it. He had said that's a very lonely process for him and it takes a lot out of him.
Yeah.
He's very envious of authors that can be consistently good and just continue to put out more books, whereas it takes him longer. And I wish, God, I hope he ever watches this video and is just hear us, take all the time you need. Because if you put out masterpieces like this and Vanished Birds, I don't mind how long it lasts at all.
Simon Jimenez, you can write a grocery list and I'll read it. So
yeah, for sure.
But I mean, so kind of, the emotional taxation of writing, it's reflected in the novel. This is so, I did not expect to have the emotional connection or experiences that I had with this book and these characters. And it's not a, I don't know, a Robin Hobb-esque character depth, dive of character work. But it's you're not following one character for 1,200 pages or whatever over a series. You're following a lot of characters and you're introduced to a lot of characters over 500 some odd pages?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, and they all feel so incredibly real. Not just Kima and June, who are the main characters, and the narrator as you, but just everything from Kima and June to Defect the tortoise, who I love.
Love him so much.
So much. I bawled like a baby when he died. And I'm no, not Defect.
And I think I remember I messaged you too when I met him and was like, this is my favorite character. And it was that didn't age well.
Yeah, so, that's why I didn't respond. I was like, I can't say anything.
Can't say anything. Even Lola, though, his Lola, I had both my parents were divorced and remarried. So I had 2 sets of grandparents on both sides. And they were honestly, of course, they're individual people, but they're all so different. And I could see bits and pieces of them in my own upbringing with them, with telling stories and having this need to pass down this really important thing to a generation that may or may not even really care about it anymore. And I like that the narrator is being told the story. I like that they are more invested in what she has to say for some reason. I think early on she mentions that there's going to be romance in this book, and but a year ago or 2 years ago, he would have been like all shy and kind of embarrassed about it. And now he's invested because he's more not a man, but just more mature and more invested in a more adult or coming of age or growing up story. And that's when I started to get hooked. I didn't get full on hooked until we got to the theater, because that was very unexpected for me. I did not expect. I figured, okay, this is going to be two stories happening side by side in tandem. It's she's telling him the story and he's listening to it, and then we get to see it in the other chapters. And instead, it's like she's telling him a story. He teleports to the place that the story is going to be now told in the spirit realm, essentially. And then we see the story being played out by actors, but then you also it becomes like a movie. It becomes like you're actually there seeing it. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who doesn't usually visualize when they read, like the way that I visualize is through prose. If
Mhm.
it it's a weird thing
Yeah.
the way my brain works. And the way that Simon Jimenez writes, like it's not flowery in any way, but it's also it's very lyrical and smooth that I felt it was just a very sensory experience
Yes.
reading the text, and I totally agree about the theater, like, once we got to the theater and we got the asides and, like, kind of almost a Greek chorus, inserts of just very minor characters
Yeah.
was I'm like, "Oh my god, this is" like, I knew I was gonna love this no
In
matter what
for it,
happened
for
because it
sure.
was the execution. I had never seen anything like that before. I'm sure people obviously are very experimental,
Yeah.
with books and stuff, but I had never experienced anything like that, before and since, and it was just so beautifully executed. Um,
It
and
changes a lot, like how you perceive books like this and what you now look for in the future. It's only been the past couple of years that I've gravitated towards these. I don't want to call them experimental, but they are authors experimenting with form and telling a story in a non-traditional way, but also not where it becomes full on House of Leaves, where it becomes more of like a graphic design thing, which is still awesome in its own right, and that's a great book, if you can get to the end. But that one is a different kind of experimental, whereas this, it's playing with how a story is told, but it
yeah,
doesn't do it in a way that feels foreign either. It feels very much like, oh, I can relate to this. I can follow this like a movie. I can visualize it, even though it's these images are wild, like the moon's reflection of the surface of the water that this theater is surrounded by, and then the spirits from all these different eras sitting down, kind of like in the Greek theater,
yeah,
and they're all like saying different things, and like it's that part was where I started to get like giddy because I love. You've ever seen Spirited Away by Studio
yes,
Ghibli?
yeah,
I love the entire film, but I love when Chihiro is first going to the market and panicking because it's nighttime and the spirits are slowly starting to shift into reality, and she hasn't quite merged into that world, and our world hasn't quite merged into the spirit world. Like they're kind of like in between, and there's this like really beautiful moment of like these spirits just kind of like they were always there, but they're being they're materializing and in mid conversation and stuff. And that's how I felt about the theater. It was empty for a minute, and then when he got there, it just started to fill up all these different spirits from all over. But they weren't like it wasn't scary. It wasn't like a horror book where they're like
yeah.
vengeful spirits.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because I felt for me like the inverted theater, you know, his Lola mentions that you can only visit the inverted theater once, and that because she's telling these stories, it felt for me like these stories were so ingrained in him that he was able to visit the inverted theater. But there's also this like weird thing that the story she's telling him was also because he was in the inverted theater. Again, I don't understand how he's able to do this. Like it was
Yeah, it's
so
wild.
good. But it's like this I felt like there's almost this dreamlike quality
Yeah, one hundred
to
percent.
the theater, and like you said, it's kind of this kind of limbo, not necessarily purgatory, but this limbo type
Yeah.
state where you don't know what's real, what's not. You don't know if you're in this world or the other world, and
Hmm.
there's these options and layers upon layers of who was it? I'm blanking on the lady's name. Uh,
Shh.
Kima's like friend.
Sh-
I
uh, it's not Sean. It's
think it starts with an A. It's the one who had the spear. Was like, hey, take this to and give her a message. Just say something kind. Which
yes,
also
it
freaking
starts with
lost it
A.
at that line.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, especially when it comes full circle in the end.
Yeah, oh, yeah. But anyways, that lady, when they meet her or he meets her again on, I think it was the road below. So
Mhm.
there's even more, like, even when you're in this inverted theater, in this dream world, in this old world, there's still more like fantastical worlds in that world, and it's just
Yeah.
it's so good.
It makes it feel expansive and like
Yeah,
there, which is my favorite because I feel like when you're told everything and you have like this perfect layout of an otherworldly place, it loses its magic a little bit because now you look you've mapped it, you know where the corners are, you know where the windows are. I like that, he leaves it kind of literally wide open and hints at these other places. I think that's really great and something that he does really well in this book that could have lost me really easily. I think a lesser someone less deft with prose could have lost me on that because it would have felt like too confusing or too wild. But it felt so, like you said, dreamlike. It reminded me of like astral projection. Like I believe that he was talking to his Lola and she's blowing smoke in his face and either she's getting on super high or he's just like getting in a meditative state and then astral projecting himself into this theater. It's just wild, really. But then he has a spear in his hands, and it's a spear that he's had in his living room his whole life. And it's kind of like you can't touch that spear, and it feels very traditional. It feels like tradition, and it feels very much linked to his family and their own mythology, but doesn't really know much about it. And then we like learn this whole backstory, and I love that it's almost like a play on like it's my great 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 grandfather's brothers, sisters, cousins, like because it at one point it like verges way out. Like I in the beginning was like, oh, this is gonna be about like his great grandfather or something. But
yeah,
it's like it's so far.
yeah.
It's like so many other people get involved and touch the spear as it travels through the story. I thought that was wild too. But yeah.
And then that the the crux of the end of the book is dependent upon him in the future, which again, it's just like this time differential,
Mhm.
time theory, time travel theories or whatever.
Some
Um,
dark tower
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Um, Still haven't read Dark Tower.
It's good.
Don't worry about it. It's fine. Um, but so we've talked about like narrative structure, like the thematic elements. Oh my god, it's great. We haven't actually really talked about the plot. Like we've talked about obviously the inverted theater and stuff like that, but I guess the one of the main plot points is Kima and June,
Mhm.
and we're talking about like the grandness of just the intent of the story, and it is a grand journey. It's like a very fantastical, like almost traditional epic fantasy, but for
Mhm.
me, and I think I put this in my review somewhere, it's like it feels intentionally like defiant of epic fantasy while at the same time paying homage to those traditions,
Mhm.
because it just takes the place over 5 days. You
Yeah.
wouldn't think that so much could
So
happen
much.
over those 5 days, and like, and it doesn't feel rushed. It's simultaneously like, I don't know, you feel so connected to everything, all the characters, all the plot points over those
Mhm.
5 days, and it's just so good. I guess we can start with the first day, which is we're introduced. Well, actually, before we're introduced to Kima and June and to what's did they ever
The
say her
moon
name is just the moon goddess, right? Or
the moon
the
goddess. Yep.
yeah,
And
and
the moon emperor technically and his three sons, although we only
yeah,
meet the first
yeah,
son
and the bird that is
missing.
missing. So I loved how this world was introduced, how the emperor was introduced, and I had no expectations of what was going to happen.
Mhm.
But like immediately I was grasped. I'm like, I am in for this ride. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Mhm.
And I I was oddly like, I don't want to say that I liked the terror, but I was intrigued by by them. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I mean, they are the children, of this goddess and this emperor, and one is mortal, one is not, and they each have their own like boon or power. And there are things that we've seen before in high fantasy and fantasy, but like the way that Jimenez does it, it's way more. I don't want to say realistic, that's not the word, but it's more raw,
Yeah.
and things happen so quickly. Like there's no magic system that's explained. It's not like when you're reading like a Brennan Sanderson book and he's like, this is how this magic works. Here's the 2-page description of how Stormlight works. This is just like
Magic
this
is
guy
still magic.
magic is magic, and this turtle is talking. They're telephones. They talk to each other. Also, this guy exploded on the wall because he uses force powers on him. Like it's snappy, and it feels both trapped in modern times with like the way they talk, because like they have that old world dialect, like you're reading like a fantasy story, like storytelling, but then it slips into like they'll drop the f-bomb or the
You
way
can
they
say
talk
fuck,
to each
it's
other.
fine. I don't care.
Yeah. They'll say fuck, and it's just like it throws you off for a second, but then everything else is so visceral and intense and like fast paced that
Like it doesn't pull you out though.
it does not.
Normally
Yeah,
I would feel like what? I'm so pulled out of the story right now, but it works.
yeah. Like if I'm reading Wheel of Time and Rand is like fuck you, Egwene, I'd be like,
Meh?
it would teleport me out of the story. I'd be like, what's happening? But in this one, I don't know if it was because he laid the groundwork of it being in our world and she's telling the story, and maybe the actors or Lola is just embellishing. And that's another element too of the whole book, is like, this is, no matter, at the end of the day, it's still Lola telling the story and the theater troupe telling the story. So like parts could also be embellished too, which I think is really beautiful too. It says a lot about mythology and storytelling.
I would actually so my perception of that is, yes, it is the Lola telling the story, but at the same time, like at some points the narrator is telling the story to his siblings.
Yeah.
So it's like and it's after his Lola had died. So there's just like this sense
Telephone.
of time is so mysterious, and it's because he's in the dream theater. Like I feel like the inverted theater is like the kind of time warp. Rocky Horror is playing in my head now. Like time, this time like thing that is, everything is happening at the same time, but also like, I don't know, it all comes together in this one place, and it's just
I would say the theater itself is like a nexus for all these things, because like the story that's being told, and then like the modern story, and then like the fast forward to time of the modern story, even the dad being younger, all that stuff kind of like comes to the middle in this theater, and they can talk to each other, which is super cool, because that was not even on my radar for possibilities to this book. I came into it being like, oh, it's about these two guys, they're gonna have a spear at some point, it's probably gonna cut this. Also, and that's probably going to be a metaphor. Also, they're traveling with this old god, trapped in a body across this ancient magical land. That was me going into it, and I had no other understanding.
Yeah,
none.
So, going back to the before part, when, like you mentioned, the emperor gets exploded on the wall. I knew,
which was unexpected.
It was very, and I'm like, my jaw literally dropped. I'm like, what is happening? It was at that moment that almost at that moment that I realized this is gonna be really violent.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Unexpected, but it's not like, I'm not normally, I don't like a lot of violent things. So that he could write something so violent that I want to continue to read it, and I find it still so beautiful, and I'm like, how my brain is confused, but in a good way right now.
It's a great demonstration of being a great writer and being able to handle certain. There's some pretty grim and gritty and pretty foul things that happen in this book. I don't even know, like, I wouldn't say that it needs to be read with a trigger warning going into it, but there's some pretty violent things that happen. If graphic violence and gore, but he does it in such a way that I was like, there were several times where I was like, wow, that was disgusting and beautiful.
Yeah.
I'll just keep going. And the Emperor was one of them, mostly because in my mind, I'm like, oh, this character wants to go travel his land with his sons and he wants to see everything and he's going to be a pain in the ass the whole book. And that's just going to be his character. And then it was like, gone.
Yeah.
I was like,
Gone. Yeah.
but then I was like, what is in that room? Like,
yeah.
What did that to him? And you find out it's the moon goddess who's just kind of like pissed and time to go for her.
Yeah.
Which is where we meet our one of our main characters too.
Yes, June, her grandson. Yes, grandson.
Yeah.
He's such an interesting character. I don't know how to describe. Like, this is one of those books that it's so hard for me to describe, which I don't even know why. I was like, let's talk about this because it's so hard to describe. When you, at least for me, I don't know about you, but like when you like a book so much, or you love a book so much, and you have such a connection to it, it's really hard for me to put into words and like formalize what those feelings are.
For sure.
Verbally. So I'm just like, it's such a great book.
Well, you know, it's shedding light on a book that I know was on a lot of magazines and blogs and booktube and booktuber bookstagrammers radars, but his books, both of them, aren't talked about as much as I would like them to be, just because I think they're amazing and I'm biased. But I think Tor and Orbit really run the show when it comes to marketing sci-fi and fantasy lately. I'd say over the last 5 years, probably like the start of the pandemic to now, probably a little before that too. But so that's like all over Book Talk and all over. And I'm not even on Book Talk, but I know, like, you know, I go to Books A Million or Barnes and Nobles. They have a Book Talk table now, and you see the titles that are on there, and the sci-fi or fantasy books that aren't from those two publishers. I don't know if they get swept under the rug or lost in the mix, but just I'm the same way. When I get connected to something, like when I read Vanished Birds, I like did the review, and it took me I did that review twice because the first take of it was just me being like, it's awesome and it's space. It's cool. It's like Interstellar, but like Hyperion. Read it. Like it was non-coherent. Like no one would ever watch that. I had to like redo the whole thing and like dial myself back. And so I totally get it. And this book is, I would say, twice as difficult to talk about because it's structured in a strange way, but it's also just layered, and you don't want to give too much away because we don't want to be like a super spoiler video. But
there's a complexity to it, but it's still accessible, I think.
Yeah.
So I did want to share one of the quotes. I'm trying to find it actually. That's a great example. If anyone has made it this far that it hasn't read the book, sorry that we've spoiled so much for you. But if one line can convince you to read this book, I'm hoping it'll be this one if I can find it.
I wonder if we did the same one.
So shoot, shenanigans. So basically, I'm not going to find it, but it's basically a character's head gets chopped off, and the way that they describe it is it the one that you were thinking of too?
No, but I love how you started that one off.
Okay,
basically,
a character's head gets chopped off, and the way that it's described. Don't quote me on this. I'm paraphrasing since I can't find it in the actual book because I got too many tabs on this thing. Is the head or the blood fell like red petals upon the ground, and it's referring to blood coming out. And I'm like, this is, oh my god! Like I feel like I need to get that tattooed on my body. Like it's just. That imagery is, I would have never have thought to put it that way, but it's beautiful and violent and gross, but so appropriate. And it's just, an example of the prose there.
He does a great job of making the stakes feel super high. And that is something that I find to be difficult to do, at least for me, when I'm reading a book that is already telling me this has already happened. This is in the past. It's like prequels. I don't like prequels because I know what's going to happen to these characters. If there's
there's no tension because
these bad guys
are like Star Wars show on Disney Plus right now. Okay.
No stakes. Everyone's fine. Yeah. You can literally drag a character through open flame, and I'm like, he's fine. Eat my
Yeah.
popcorn. He'll be fine.
Episode 4, he survives. There you go.
So these guys, however, June and Kima, and I think I'm trying to think who we meet first before like they get together. I think
I think
it's
it's June, right?
yeah, because Kima is the warrior from Dewar. Although I think maybe it is Kima because he goes to the town first.
Oh yeah, so I'm thinking, so technically we meet the Emperor first.
Yeah.
Or the first terror, and he talks about June because that's
Yes.
his son. But we actually technically first meet Kima. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
Who's traveling, and he's on this like very personal quest. And right away, it's just this one-armed soldier or this spear guy who just seems really lost and kind of remind me of Kaladin from Stormlight a little bit. And I was kind of like, oh, what's this guy's deal? And then when we meet, not June, he comes off as like this, like he's lived a life already and has probably made some mistakes in his past, and definitely has. But he's, I don't want to say he's coming off on a clean slate, but you can tell he's on this precipice of deciding of what kind of person he wants to be moving forward. And it's after the Emperor is exploded, and this god comes out. That's the moment where it's like, am I going to continue to be molded by the world around me, or am I going to live myself? And I think that's a big theme for this book, is like living for yourself and doing not necessarily the right thing for the right thing's sake, but because what you feel is right personally. And both characters are doing that for two different reasons, and they kind of smash together. And they're not very nice to each other in the beginning. These two unlikely allies, they get into a lot of fist fights and beat each other up, and they say really awful things to each other, which I was like, is this going to be one of those like just like brutal friendships this whole book, or is this going to be like enemies to lovers? Because I'm down for both, but I kind of hope it's the latter.
Well, I mean, one quote that I did see, so I can quote this, is it's a love story to the blade dented bone. And so I knew something was going to happen, and I didn't know what. And something that I picked up on reread is the usage of dance throughout, as a representation. And it's really, I just think it's so cool how he used dance as this kind of this connection through violence, where they're fighting and then they wind up dancing and then they wind up getting together, and it's through dance and this just connection, and it's just
the dancing is beautiful, and it kind of mirrors the ultra violence of the fighting, because the fighting never really comes off as like medieval Game of Thrones-y hacking and slashing. It's very like quick and abrupt and efficient, I would say.
Yeah, it's more like not necessarily brawls or whatever, but like how I remember play fighting was, but not play fighting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly, 100%. Yeah. That's actually a great way of looking at it. So we meet these characters. They essentially decide to do the right thing and accompany this goddess, this moon goddess, who's trapped in this old withering body, to be reunited with her lover, which we are being told throughout the story is the ocean or the sea. And so chaos breaks loose. We have the Emperor's sons now, the Terrors, wanting to get her back because she's kind of like the source of their power, and the really weird, very weird family dynamic way, especially towards the end.
Oh God, is it bad that I love that scene so much?
I loved it too, because it was it's so intense, and like I was like,
super duper spoiler alert. Super duper spoiler alert. Oh God, when they eat her.
It is very reminiscent of Star Eater, Kirsten Hall. Very different story, but like had a similar like cringing with like, it's awesome.
But I'm like, I can't look away. What is happening?
Because this whole concept of like consuming the mother, consuming your parents, consuming power, passing down power, things that are hereditary. It just, there's so much layers there, and normally that kind of thing is, I don't want to say glossed over, but it's kind of like shined up and made to look pretty, and Jimenez doesn't do that. He makes it very like gritty.
Again, there's that brutality to it. Like, he doesn't shy away from that, like you said.
Like literally just full on put my finger, he puts her finger in his mouth, and I'm pretty sure he just bites it off, and it's like,
Yeah.
and then eats it in front of her. It's like, ah. But it's also like really beautifully written, and you feel it, and like she's also able to like project herself into these animals to help the boys get to her, and that was probably my favorite scene of the whole book is when he's
It was
riding.
so I was like, even rereading it, I'm like, I'm like, my heart is like racing because it's just so action packed, but it's not really like, I don't know. It's this book is, I feel like a dichotomy of a juxtaposition of opposites.
Mhm.
It's very grand, but it's intimate, and it's like it's very personal, but it's also universal, and
Yeah,
it's beautiful, but also gross, and it's just
full full dualities, which I love because you have these two male characters that kind of are the opposite of each other in a lot of ways, but also have some pretty incredible similarities as well, which I'm sure was intentional from Simon. But we're here kind of, and there's a lot of trust you have to give, and I'm starting to love these books like this, where you're not in control as the reader. You're there, and the author has you, and they're the captain. They are telling you you're just there. They're piloting you through it, and you have to kind of like not fight it. You're gonna be confused. You're gonna be like, what is happening? But it's also like an experience. So like surrender that control. And I found in those big moments of duality where there's just two combating tones or genres or feelings, just kind of like let it happen. And I enjoyed all those sections twice as much as I would have had I stopped and like reread and tried really hard to pick it apart.
yeah.
Which I
Well,
can't wait for my second read.
yeah, I mean, it's a good another layer to add to this is like, we have to trust Simon Jimenez as the author, to tell us this story the same way that the narrator had to trust his Lola, and
Yeah.
telling the story to his siblings as well, and yeah, it's just so good.
So I want to look at the I was thinking about what is the girl's name that he's supposed to give the spear to?
Oh, starts with an S.
Yeah, I thought it was like Sean or Chandra maybe, but now I'm second guessing myself.
Jaina.
I think so. I love that character. It's okay though. I mostly lost my thought. I did want to ask you what your favorite scene was in the book because I have several. One of mine was the big bear chase, astral projection, cannibalization scene.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, honestly, all the tabs. This it's so like tightly woven together that I feel like picking a scene out and saying it's my favorite is like it kind of unravels it, and I'm like, this is just, it feels so complete as a novel that I'm like, I just love it all. Like
mhm.
it's all so, I don't know. Every scene kind of blends into the next
Yeah,
so
it bleeds.
seamlessly. So other than if I absolutely had to pick, other than the cannibalistic scene, because that, I guess we're morbid people. I guess. I actually really, really, really like the end of the book.
Yes.
Specifically the third terror. Finding out again, if you made it this far, you know what? If you made it this far, screw you, okay? It's your own fault.
Spoilers galore. So it's the Wild West of spoilers. We're out in the desert of it all.
When you realize that the third terror is the bird, or the bird is the third terror. So I will say, going back, when Kima opens up the kind of bottom the hidden compartment in the what is it, the wagon thing,
Yeah.
and he finds the bird, I was like, oh, that's the bird from before. Oh my god.
Oh yeah.
And I was just, I was, as the kids say, shook.
Shooketh.
And then when it turns out to be the third terror, I was like, holy shit. Holy shit.
It's huge.
I didn't expect the huge giant dong, but I'll take it. It's fine.
There's a lot of sexuality and just nudity in this book as well. That was pretty wonderful.
But it doesn't feel gratuitous. Like,
no,
it's not like, objectification or whatever. It just,
no,
it felt very natural to the story. But and then just how seemingly like random the whole that last town, I can't remember the name of the town, where the jail is, where Shayna, I think it was Shayna, I will probably try and correct myself if it's not her name in the description or in a comment. She's looking for her father, and then that comes all around and together, where the third terror is the monster in that jail.
Yep.
And
that part was so intense too. I did not expect that. The way Jimenez weaved all these like little kingdoms in this other world and how they're all kind of like led by different animals. It was very reminiscent of, not really Jungle Book, but it kind of had that same vibe where like each zone is run by a different type of, not necessarily culture, but different type of people with their different animal themes, and some of them were actual talking animals, which was pretty cool, and some that were like moving on. It was a very, I could tell by reading it that this world exists very perfectly in his head, and therefore it translated to me as something I could follow and not get super lost. And even though it to me felt very obscure at times, where like the animals are just, especially the last town where like the houses are all like seashells and stuff. I was like, wait, what? But I think the ending is probably one of my favorite scenes, next to the bear scene. But I also love the scene where Jun and Kima, for one reason or the other, I won't give too many spoilers, but they kind of like they don't really teleport. They go into each other's bodies, basically. They can feel each other's feelings.
Yeah.
After a fight.
That did seem very much. I'm like, I'm not a prude by any means, but I always get uncomfortable when there's like physical intimacy, like in movies, in books, or whatever. So that's the only thing that if I had to nitpick, I was just like, I'm a little uncomfortable here. But that's just because, again, I'm not a prude, but I'm just like, I feel like I'm intruding on something. Like this is a private moment.
For sure. It felt very real though. I felt, this past year, my patrons begged me, I won't say they begged me, they convinced me on essentially a dare to read a Sarah J. Maas book. And I read 2 Sarah J. Maas books. So I was subjugated to a tier of smut that I was not privy to until then. And so, and I won't harp on whether she's good or a bad writer. I think she's great for what she's doing, and I love that people love her. And now that I've seen that level of smut, when I go into other books, certain sexuality will either be explicit or it'll have like this beautiful character development feeling, meaning to it. It actually holds value. And I feel like in both his books, there are scenes like this. Vanished Birds, I feel like, was a little more profound with its moment because it was a big deal for that character's coming out. Whereas in this book, you kind of knew both characters maybe gay men. You weren't 100% certain, but that was just kind of the vibe of how their conversations were going. Or bisexual. I don't think it's explicitly stated. But in that moment, it did feel like you're intruding on, like you're like a peeping Tom in this moment, that like even the characters felt uncomfortable because they're like, what is happening right now to us? Why are we mixing? Why am I in your body and why are you in my body? And there was something like kind of goofy about it, but also it felt like it didn't feel like overly magical, explicit, like fairy sex. It felt like weird and uncomfortable, but like not in a way that made
like the characters felt weird and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So like I that's why I didn't feel like, oh my God, like this felt, it was it was intentional.
Yes.
So yeah.
And then come to the ending of it with their dance before the wave. And that was one of my favorite moments of the book. And it's really what solidified. I already was a huge fan of Jimenez before this because I loved Vanished Birds so much. That's a book that I read it, and I read 104 books, and I try to read 100 books a year, and I'm probably going to bump that goal down as I progress into my reading career here. But that year I read 104 books, and that was not the only book, but one of like 2 that I kept coming back to and kept thinking about. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this book will be no different. I find myself just kind of like thinking about certain moments, whether because they were graphic or violent or visceral. I'll just like think about those moments for that purpose, or I'll think about like it's not nonsensical, because the book is definitely not nonsensical, but it's a mythology of a culture in a world that I was not exposed to until reading this book, and it made me want to learn more about Jimenez's heritage and about this world he's created and its influences. And this is coming from someone, while I was in school, I studied art history and mythology and stuff like that. I love those topics, but we never touched on stuff like this, and it just made me. It kind of makes the world just feel bigger when you're reading it, and it doesn't feel like a medieval fantasy world. It feels very much like its own thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was wonderful.
It's definitely non-traditional,
Mhm.
without it feeling foreign. And I know that probably sounds bad, but it doesn't feel traditional in the kind of Western sense, but it also doesn't feel like you can tell the kind of the influences that the author had
Mhm.
from his culture and growing up. But again, at the same time, it still feels so universal. So great.
It's so great. Do you have a favorite quote?
Um,
I was like, trick
all my
question.
freaking tabs. So I'll actually ask you your favorite quote before, because I think I want to end this stream by just reading one of my favorite quotes from the end of the book that I think is a good selling point.
I love that. And then, again, goes without saying, but thank you so much for having me. I love this author. I love this book, and I love your channel. And I'm so happy that we got to like have all this nexus of perfect things combining together to talk about this book together. So thank you for having me. But
thank you for getting this book on my radar, because without you, I would not have even known this book existed. So
just the messenger, just happened to cross my path. I don't even know how I found Vanished Birds. I think it was literally just a random off the shelf, like, oh, that looks cool. I grabbed it, and those are my favorite reads because it's not influenced by anything besides curiosity.
Yeah.
But I have this book could be my second read. This would be covered in tabs too. A lot of my favorite quotes were the spirits just talking and saying random shit, because especially like. I loved. Sorry, I'm just getting sidetracked. I love when a character would die and then like immediately the spirit would say something. The spirit would like in the theater.
Oh, yeah,
they were like, "Oh my god, oh, so cool!" Just like,
no, I was just gonna say, so like, to go aside from your aside, even those very, very minor characters, I felt so connected to them, even if they were on the page for literally one sentence or two.
Yeah,
like
because
they
felt
so
real.
Yes, so so good. Anyway,
it's a way of giving stakes to a story that shouldn't have had any stakes, because a lot of this stuff's already happened. But it's so in the now and visceral in the moment. The pacing is so fast, and you're right there with June and Kima when these people, random characters aside, get literally cut down or die like very violently. Even the girl, the dancer with the I think it was the second terror that can like basically tell you to do something.
Yeah,
and
she just kept dancing and dancing until she broke her. Oh god,
huge Suspiria 2018 vibes. I was like,
yeah.
that part actually grossed me out and bothered me, because I was like, how's this gonna end? That part really grossed me out in a great way. Beautiful scene. So favorite quote, it's when Kima and June are realizing that they're going to have to give their lives, the moon energy within them, to stop this wave. So that it's not just as simple as doing the dance in front of the wave. They actually have to give themselves, sacrifice themselves for the rest of the world. And we kind of knew that was going to happen early in the book, and this is kind of leading up to it. But they're torn between this because the two characters have kind of like built a relationship, and they love each other in their own unique way, and they don't want this to happen. They don't want to lose each other. And so it's a decent amount of the book that, if this was another more blockbustery book directed by Michael Bay, it'd be like a page of like, no, don't do it. I don't want you to go, but we have to. Let's do it. And that's the end. And I love that it's like 10 or 16 pages of them like really fighting with each other, which is like kind of, worked with the whole moon and ocean pushing and pulling thing. But my favorite quote is Kima, this moonlit body says, venturing a step toward him, and then another. What tale is told of you, of your exploits, is decided here. We stand in the place where the rhythm is decided, and from which the pattern unspools. If you walk away, that will be your choice. In all things that lie between these heavens, this one has seen and understood. It has been witness to and has told the tales of crimes of far greater magnitude than that of a boy who decided to live for himself. And I thought that was really profound and really beautiful, because I find lately a lot of the books that I'm reading that have godlike characters or deities are very bossy, and they're very much like it's their way or the highway. And this was not the case, whether
Yeah.
it because they owed her a favor or she was indebted to them. It was really beautiful to have a character actually have that free will, that freedom of choice in this
Yeah.
huge climactic moment. That was my
Just
favorite.
agency throughout.
Yes.
So good. I could talk for a whole nother hour about this book. So if you want to do a part 2, that's fine.
You let me know. I'm down.
Or whenever you do the reread, I'll reread it with you.
Heck
And
yeah.
then we can do a part 2. But I will I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream on one of my many favorite quotes. And I think it really sums up the story and just the poeticness of Simon Jimenez's writing and storytelling. And it's toward the end of the book, page 485. If you got I know you got the hardback, so
Yeah.
485. One day, in the endless loop of history, in the circular currents of its water, where there was no future and no past, these steps would be inscribed in the shaft of an antique wooden weapon and would tell the tale of these two warriors.
I love
Stunning.
that.
Gorgeous.
Super.
Stunning.
Yes. Full circle.
So great.
Profound as fuck is what I would consider this book to be. I
I'm
was very
gonna title this "Spear Cuts Through Water" discussion. Profound as fuck.
I love it.
All right. On that note, we're gonna end on that. Oh, by the way, actually, sorry. Just to make sure we give the shout out. If you like the background, that is the end pages. I don't even know what they're called. I think they're called end pages, right?
Yep.
Of the book. And you had the artist's name.
Chris Pennetier.
There you go. I will leave a link down below to the artist's website, so you can definitely check out the artist stuff. Obviously, the cover is also gorgeous as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, I'm not a big fan of hand stuff, but this is so well done. Anyway, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. Hopefully you pick up the book. I mean, if you're already here, whatever. It's
probably already did.
Yeah. I will leave a link down below to bookshop/Amazon purchase things, even if you've already read the book. Buy a second or third copy if you want.
Holiday season, Christmas.
Yeah. Or just buy them for yourself. You know, treat yourself, as it were. But thank you so much. Thank you, Nick, for joining me. It was a great time. I love gushing about books, and who better to gush about this book with than the one who got me to read it? So
perfect, fitting, poetic.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And again, I don't know how to do intros or outros, so bye.
Bye.